Okay. The next thing, which I actually got a specific request from a particular student, is the long run and the short run. Okay. So some of you are getting a little bit confused, and the best way to really think about it is to really run through an example. Okay. So let's say that I own a tutoring business. Okay. And the question is really, well, should I operate or should I not operate? Okay. And let's give you some financial data. Per day, the revenue I get is $250. The wages, I have to employ a tutor, so that's basically $200 a day. And because I don't actually own my own premises, I basically have to pay rent. Okay, and that's basically $100. Okay, so hopefully you can see where this is kind of going. So let's start with the very basics. What is the profit? The way that we define profit is total revenue minus total cost. So in this case, it's 250 minus 200 minus 100, which suggests I'm making a loss of $50, right? But the next critical question is, should I actually be operating, right? And that's a very good question, because it's a question simply about, well, how do you categorize the costs? That's what it's basically going to come down to. So what we really need to think about is, what are the variable costs and what are the fixed costs? Okay. So let's think about this very, very carefully. Suppose I'm in the short run. Okay. I'm a tutoring business, and what's basically happened is I know that I'm making a loss every day, right? But remember, we're in a short run. So I've got to pay $100 rent, right? Regardless of what happens. So if that were the case, should I then not operate tomorrow? Think about it carefully. Okay. Well, let's think about what is the alternative. If I decide to operate, I suffer a loss of $50. In the short run, okay, what would happen? If I don't operate, I still got to pay my rent, right? So I actually suffer a loss of 100. So suffering minus 50 is better than suffering minus 100. So I should basically continue to operate. And this then kind of links in to the definition that we have in the book, right? In the book, right, if your profits from production is less than your fixed cost, then you should basically then shut down, right? Another way that you could think about it is, if revenue is less than total cost, then you should basically shut down. Okay, and I did do a little bit of rearranging here. Okay, so this is kind of what I have basically said before, where I said, in the short run, I still got to consider the fact, and I've got to accept the fact, that I've still got to pay my rent. So using the cost benefit principle, right, alternative one is where I earn zero revenue, but I still got to pay my fixed cost, so I lose 100. The second alternative is to then say, okay, I continue to operate, I earn 250, but I've still got to pay my variable cost as well. So my loss is minus 50. So if I do that comparison, I should continue to operate in the short run. How about the long run, right? In the long run, things are a little bit different, right? Remember, in the long run, everything is variable, right? So what we're saying is, we should only produce if and only if total revenue exceeds total cost. Okay, and then if you rearrange this, you should arrive at this condition here, which is profit is less than zero. Okay, and that's the same condition that you'd have in your book. Okay, remember what profits is: total revenue minus total cost. Okay, so in the long run, I'm in this tutoring business. What's the mindset? I can either A, continue to operate and suffer basically minus 50, or I could choose to exit the industry. So if I exit the industry, right, I earn zero revenue, and because all costs are variable, I actually have that fixed cost is basically become a variable cost in some ways, and I can get out of it. So I don't make any money, in short. So which is better then, minus 50 or zero? Well, obviously zero. So what this suggests is that in the long run, I should actually exit the industry, right? So hopefully that should all be clear. So as a bit of a bonus, what I thought I'd do is I will draw a few cost curves and show you a few features of these things. So if we you should all be familiar with this, P and Q. So you've seen that you have this. So this is your ATC, average total cost, your AVC, and this is your MC. Okay. So these curves you should be very familiar with. Obviously, the difference here would represent your fixed cost. Okay. So a lot of you are familiar with this diagram, but let's say you want to highlight profits. Where would it be? Okay. So there would be a price. Let's call this P star. So think of it as just $1 if it makes it easier. Okay. So let's say $1. And what do we know is the profit maximizing condition for the firm? They would always choose P equals to MC. MC. That's what we do know. Okay. So if we say that this is $1, okay, or we call that P star, his supply decision, right, is P equals to MC, which is on this curve, and this is then the quantity that is associated with it. Okay, so then what is then the profit? Well, what is profit? Total revenue minus total cost. So what's total revenue? Total revenue is equal to P times Q, okay, which is basically this area, which you can then hopefully see, but I'll just erase it. Okay. And what's total cost? Well, you could think of it as ATC multiplied by Q, right? So it would be down here on this graph, right? So what is then the difference? That. And that's basically your profit. Okay. So hopefully that should be clear as to how you identify profits on this particular graph. But then a deeper question then becomes, well, what is then the supply? So the supply, what I'm trying to probe from you guys is for you guys to really recognize that supply comes from the fact that the firm is making a rational decision. That is to maximize profit. And the way it maximizes profit is by choosing where price equals to marginal cost, right? So this is why the decision to supply is pretty much dictated by your marginal cost. The next question is, well, which part of the marginal cost curve? Well, in the short run, right, you would always supply if and only if you're above your AVC. This is why in the short run, it's actually this whole part here. However, in the long run, we know that if you are here, you're making negative profits, right? And if you're making negative profits, then would you want to supply in the long run? The answer is no. So this is why in the longer run, it's all the supply curve that's above the ATC. So that's one of the subtleties that I really want you to get out of this particular chapter. That for you, you should really recognize that the supply curve is dictated first by the condition that price must equal to marginal cost, and that is indeed the profit maximizing condition. And hence, the decision to supply is then dictated by whether you would shut down or exit. what time horizon are you looking at? And I really want to emphasize that because a lot of you seem to have missed that subtlety. So that's pretty much the cost curves.